What's up, guys? UFC Fight Night in Tampa was Unk Night. Swanson winning, Dustin, Jacoby, Michael Johnson, Davey Grant with some insane performances, man. It was such a good card. What a way to end the year with a good fight night. The doctor stoppage in the main event wasn't ideal, but Buckley was winning that fight, man. I thought the fight should have continued since we've seen way worse cuts not get stopped. Colby fought better than he did against Leon, but it just wasn't enough for the new generation of the welterweight division. It seems like the new gen is passing up the older generation. And this was supposed to be the fight card for the old guys, man, the veterans, the geezers. But Colby was the one that needed to finalize that, right? He needed to be the one to get that main event win where Michael Johnson got a big knockout, Dustin Jacoby got a big knockout, Swanson got a big knockout, Davey Grant putting on a good performance. But I would say overall, the card was like an 8 or 9 out of 10. One of the better fight night cards we've seen in recent years. I think the performance bonuses should go to Swanson, Dustin Jacoby, Michael Johnson, and maybe Yoel Alvarez. It's kind of tough between him and Sean Woodson. But Yoel Alvarez having the headlock and then punching Drakkar close when I think he was out. But he wasn't letting go. He wanted to keep going. And I think the fighter that had the best performance, he shined, was Manel Kape. What an amazing performance from him, man. We will talk about all the low blows. We will talk about Keith Peterson, and Dominic Cruz is right all along. Bro has to be going on a bender before these fights. But we'll start with the main event. Joaquin Buckley defeats Colby Covington by a third round TKO due to a doctor stoppage. And I think it was a punch in the first round that caused the cut. I was thinking maybe it was a head clash in some of the wrestling exchanges or something, but it seemed to have been a punch. I don't know about the doctor stoppage though. She said that the cut could have like removed the eyelid or something. I don't know what she was saying, but she looked grossed out by the eye. She didn't even want to touch it. It's like, bro, us MMA fans, we see worse cuts than that. Irene Aldana looked like she got carved up in a sword fight, and they still didn't stop that fight due to the cut. Made Colby's look like a paper cut. And it was the last fight of the year. We don't want to see Colby versus Buckley end with a cut, especially we know that Colby does better the later the fight goes. Usually, because Buckley's never been 5 rounds before. He has the kind of fighting style and the fast twitch muscle fibers to maybe tire out in the later rounds. The fight didn't even get into the 4th round yet. I thought the fight should have continued, but up until then, Buckley was winning the fight handily. And Buckley just looked like the far better fighter out there, landing big shots to the body, left straights, stuffing most of the takedowns. Colby looked slower physically. He looked like he was a bit older in this fight, even though he performed better than he did against Leon. He had a better pace in the 2nd round. He was going forward, throwing punches, going for takedowns and stuff. In one moment, he did get out grappled where Joaquin Buckley was able to defend the takedown. He eventually got on top, got into full mount briefly, where it looked like he could have got the back, but he abandoned the grappling altogether, just knowing that this is Colby's area of expertise. Let's get back into the stand-up. Colby landed a few good shots throughout the fight, but Joaquin Buckley had more volume, the bigger shots. He showed in this fight he's an actual contender of the welterweight division, because at middleweight, he didn't look like he was. If we're going to be honest, Buckley just did not look that great at middleweight. We never thought he would be as far as he is here in the welterweight division. He's now a top contender who's going to go up against fighters like Kamaru Usman, Leon Edwards, Shavkat, Jack Della Maddalena, Ian Gary. He's amongst the elite of the welterweight division. And he has such a good call out too. He had the fans in the arena pretty much just like help him to decide who his next opponent should be. He talked about Leon Edwards and the crowd didn't seem to care that much. So sad for Leon, man. Ever since he lost to Bilal, it seems like no one cares about him, which was also the thing before he became a champion too. A lot of fans did not care about Leon until he became a champion, and then when he lost the belt, it's like he disappeared. So the fans didn't care that much about Leon compared to the others. When he said Kamaru Usman, the fans really liked that one. Joaquin Buckley versus Kamaru Usman would be insane. And then he said Bilal Muhammad, but it got a louder reaction from the crowd than Leon, but not as loud as Kamaru. And Buckley's not getting a title shot in his next fight. So the Kamaru Usman fight would be great, but I was thinking Ian Gary. I think the Ian Gary matchup is the best to do for whoever the winner was going to be between Buckley and Covington. And there are rumors that Usman's fighting Jack Della Maddalena. So if Usman's fighting, Shavkat's fighting Bilal, Leon's fighting somebody. I don't know who he's fighting, but you could do maybe Buckley versus Gary. And as for Colby Covington, he didn't retire, so it looks like he might still fight. But as we know from Colby, he doesn't fight that often. So we might see him late next year against maybe another legend in the sport. I don't think Colby is looking to get another title shot. I don't think he's looking to make his way back up the ladder. So at this point in Colby's career, I think the kind of opponents for him are other legends of the sport that can just make a big fight. What about the legend, Swanson, getting a walk-off knockout against Billy Quarantillo, early stoppage? Does any fighter throw with more vicious intent than Swanson? Every punch this guy throws is to unalive his opponent. It's insane how much he can throw like that. From the 1st round, we've seen him all the way into the 5th round in fights, throwing punches like that without tiring out. It's insane. And at 41 years old too, hit him with the left hook, or more like a haymaker, into the right straight, KOing Billy Q with no follow-up shot. He knew the fight was over right from there. What a legend, man. He is technically in the Hall of Fame, but it was for a fight with Doo Ho Choi, and it's crazy how many exciting fights this guy has. Every single time he comes out there to compete, he's always putting on a show. Guys like him and the Korean Zombie should be in the Hall of Fame just as them as fighters. I mean, they're legends of the featherweight division. They were there from the very beginning. They fought late into their careers, always putting on a show for the fans. Some of the most exciting fighters we've ever seen in the sport. Hall of Fame worthy fighters, in my opinion. I think they should be in the Hall of Fame just as them. And the thing is, Billy Q looked really good in that fight too. Good boxing skills, landing good left hooks, the 1-2, even mixed it up with takedowns, which is something he's completely abandoned in his last 3 fights. Cub Swanson knocked out a great version of Billy Quarantillo. Billy was over a 3-1 favorite on the live odds of the fight, and Cub Swanson knocks him out in the 3rd round. Whoever bet on the live odds there on Cub Swanson made some good money, man. And as someone who's been watching Cub Swanson ever since he was absorbed to the UFC from the WEC, I've always liked watching his fights. And it's crazy to think that out of all of those guys, Cub Swanson is the one that is still fighting and still winning. I mean, Aldo's technically still fighting, but he's in the bantamweight division. Swanson left his weight class one time for one fight, came back to featherweight, and is at least exchanging wins and losses with these other fighters who are in their prime. Cub Swanson is way past his prime, and he's not had a loss streak since 2019. Insane, man. I never would have thought Cub Swanson would have been the guy that would still be around. He has such a chaotic style. I thought he was going to be one of the first of those featherweight legends to retire. Then we go to Manel Kape defeating Bruno Silva by a 3rd round TKO, cup for cup, low blow for low blow, and Bruno Silva had 3 of those, couldn't do anything with them. Manel Kape lands one of his own. Keith Peterson let that one slide after allowing Bruno Silva to cheat the whole fight. 3 low blows, 1 eye poke. Crazy. He let Kape get 1, right? And that was all it took for Kape to finish the fight. There's levels to this game. And whenever Silva landed the low blow and the fight commenced again, he threw another front kick to the body or a inside leg kick immediately. It was the front kicks that were landing low. The first one was accidental. The next 2, you would think they're accidental, but in those moments it wasn't Manel Kape like lunging forward and stuff like that. One time he was moving out to the side, and it wasn't enough for himself to cause the low blow to happen. It was Bruno Silva landing those low blows. And then in the 3rd round, he pokes Manel Kape in the eye, and it didn't look like Keith Peterson saw it. Then Manel Kape continued to piece Bruno Silva up with a technical masterclass. This guy is good, man. He was like in the flow state. One of the best performances of Manel Kape's entire career. Might even be the best performance, because the Felipe Dos Santos performance was really good, but Bruno Silva's a better fighter than Felipe Dos Santos right now. To do that against someone like Silva, who's on a big win streak, finishing most of his fights, this was the kind of bounce back that Manel Kape needed after the Muhammad Mokaev performance, which was abysmal. That was a horrible fight. He came out there to make sure he put on a show for the fans, show why he should get the next title shot. Does he deserve the rematch against Alexander Pantoja, or is it Kai Kara-France? Because the thing is, both fighters lost to Pantoja before. Pantoja beat Manel Kape in the UFC back in 2021, and he beat Kai Kara-France back in the Ultimate Fighter, which was a long time ago. Kai Kara-France knocked out Steve Erceg, put on a striking clinic against Bruno Silva. It might be recency bias, it might be the hype right now, but when you really think about it, who should get the title shot over who, it's hard to pick one of them. I think either can get a title shot, but it would be great to see them fight each other first. They have a rivalry, they don't like each other. Manel Kape talked about Kai Kara-France after the fight, but he also wants his title shot. And I think you do Alexander Pantoja versus Davison Figueiredo too. The only fighter in the UFC currently who beat him, if Figgy said he'll go back to flyweight to fight Pantoja again. So it all works out with all the contenders. Give Davison the title shot, and then have Kai and Kape finally fight each other, conclude that rivalry, and the winner gets a title shot. Then what about Dustin Jacoby getting a one-punch knockout against Vitor Petrino? So much to say about this fight. Well, Dustin Jacoby was the stake of the night. He needed a win here. He was on a losing streak, and he only just needed a win, but he made it emphatic. Big knockout win, 50K bonus most likely. Has to, right? No way he doesn't get a 50K bonus for that. He was a huge underdog going into it. Like I said before, if Vitor Petrino is ever over a minus 200 favorite, never bet on him. Can never be confident Vitor winning ever again from the Anthony Smith performance. And it just seems like Vitor should be better than he is. He has a lot of good engagement. He has a lot of good committed shots, a lot of power. Huge guy for the weight class, but he's missing the setups. He doesn't have a lot of setups to his striking. He usually just like maybe feints once or twice, which are very slight feints. They're not big feints to get the opponent to react heavily so then he can intercept them with some huge shot. They're small feints, but then he commits so heavy afterward. It doesn't combo together that well. And that's why a lot of his opponents are able to get away from some of those big punches. And Dustin Jacoby, who's been a kickboxer for a while, he's fought some of the best strikers in the world. He's not going to fall for some of these small feints from Vitor and then see these huge committed shots after. He's going to see those kind of punches from a mile away. And the way that he knocked out Vitor Petrino was almost exactly how Kamaru Usman knocked out Jorge Masvidal. Straight right as Vitor was pulling away with the left hook. Straight punch beat looping punch. And Dustin Jacoby threw that right straight because the main defense that Vitor was going to was pulling away for the counter punches. Whenever Dustin was moving forward, the usual response from Vitor was to pull away. So all Dustin needs to do is to extend his right straight to land on the chin with further extension than what a jab would be and punch in there very fast. So that's why the straight right didn't have a big telegraph. He just threw it right from his stance, but he was able to apply a lot of body weight behind it by following into the opposite stance behind. So he was lifting off of his back foot, switching into the opposite stance with all of the momentum that he was throwing forward. So it was a lot of body weight, but not a lot of telegraph. So he was sacrificing his ability to retract from the punch, but he was still being technical in the way that he threw the punch initially. That right there tells you Dustin Jacoby knew that he had the knockout, landed it perfectly on the jaw. Vitor goes down, one punch knockout. What a way to bounce back, man. Huge win for Dustin Jacoby. Then we go to Navajo Stirling defeating Tuco Tokkos by a decision. And first round was great. The rest of the fight, not as exciting. Third round was pretty good with the body kicks and stuff like that from Stirling. But after the first round, Tokkos doing a good job of negating the action, which is what he had to do. He wasn't going to outstrike this guy. He wasn't going to finish him unless he got the fight to the ground. And he tried. He got the fight to the ground in the second. He clinched up a whole lot, but ultimately didn't do too much with those. Landed a few punches because he was able to present the takedown threat, which opened up the striking for Tokkos a little bit, but he was clearly outmatched in the stand-up. Stirling was landing with some vicious body shots. Big body kicks, hooks to the body, chaining those with hooks up to the top, just way too fast, too powerful, and just ultimately too technical for Tokkos to fight against. Without using his takedowns, he needed to mix it up, but it still wasn't enough. And isn't it crazy? Doesn't Navajo Stirling look kind of like Israel Adesanya? He's like the Kiwi version of Israel Adesanya, like an actual Kiwi version of him. And that was his UFC debut, so it's a good performance for his first fight in the UFC. Against an opponent who tried to wrestle with him. Some fighters don't debut against the opposite style, which can sometimes make it difficult for them to put on a good performance. Like if a striker, especially one that comes from kickboxing, who doesn't have a lot of MMA experience, goes up against someone who's trying to take them down in their debut. So a good win for his debut, but he was like a minus 800 favorite. So a lot of fans did expect him to completely bulldoze Tokkos. Daniel Marcos defeats Adrian Yanez by a split decision. Very strange scorecards there. You had 129-28 for Yanez, a 30-27 for Marcos, and then a 29-28 for Marcos. How do you have 129-28 to the other fighter, but then one of the judges scored the entire fight, every round for the other? That doesn't make any sense. I had it 29-28 for Daniel Marcos. I thought he won the first and third rounds. Second round was close. You can argue it either way because a lot of the shots that Marcos was landing was looking like it was hurting Yanez, but it was off of the reaction where Yanez was so loose with his defense, chin up in the air and everything. Like, not a great look every time he was trying to slip the punches or move his head with them. But the first round should have absolutely had a point deduction. The sport is evolving. We have now an eye poke, low blow combination. Daniel Marcos literally throws a low blow with the front kick, then pokes Yanez in the eye and gets no point deduction. Every fighter should start eye poking and low blowing. It seems like they get two freebies. Like they can get either two eye pokes, one low blow, one eye poke, something in the mix there, you know? So in reality, I think the fight should have been a draw because it would have made the first round a 9-9 with a point deduction. Second round, I had it for Yanez very slightly. Third round, I had it for Marcos. Who was the better fighter of the two? Obviously, I thought it was Daniel Marcos. But the thing is, in the third round, Marcos was very tired. He was exhausted with his hands down walking around, and he started to wrestle a lot more, clinching with Yanez to slow down the action a bit. Even when he got to the ground, he wasn't doing a whole lot. It was clear that Marcos was exhausted before he even stood up, walking around with his hands down, and there was no urgency from Yanez. He was not throwing punches, he was not throwing kicks up until like the last 5 seconds. And just like Paul Felder was saying, hey man, I would have threw a head kick out there if my opponent's walking around with his hands down like that. Everyone would have threw something, right? That was Yanez's opportunity to win the fight. After not getting the point deduction in the first round, this was his opportunity to win the entire fight right there. Not a whole lot happened in the third round, as it was mostly on the cage with the clinch or on the ground with the takedowns. Even Yanez was clinching up in moments too, and Adrian decided not to throw anything until like the last few seconds of the fight. So it was a great fight. The action in the second round was insane. Boxing exchanges, great combinations, Yanez throwing uppercuts and hooks, slipping in in the pocket, trying to get away from punches. Although he was still getting hit by some of them because his chin is usually up in the air, Daniel Marcos was dipping for those hooks, landing some of them, but getting really close with the biggest shots. The guy's enormous for the weight class. And Yanez doing a very good job of fighting off the jab and the calf kick. So it was a great fight technically and very exciting with those moments of frustration, a lack of point deduction, and lack of urgency from Yanez in the third round, not throwing anything to try to win the fight. I don't know if he thought that he was ahead on the scorecards. I don't know if he thought he was going to win the fight and he didn't need to try and knock his opponent out, but there's no way he could have been sure that he was winning like that. You know, like, oh, I don't even need to knock this guy. I don't even need to land these shots right here when I can just ride this out to a decision. There's no way he thought he was that ahead in the fight. And I wonder what his coaches were telling him in the corner, whether he was winning the fight or not, if they told him anything like that, because the lack of urgency from Adrian Yanez is kind of crazy because he's a fighter who always goes for the knockout. He could have also thought that Daniel Marcos walking around like that, he was like playing possum or inviting him in to land some big counter shot. So in the end, it was a good win for Daniel Marcos to beat someone like Adrian Yanez, but the eye poke, the low blow, and Yanez not going for the finish when it was the best opportunity for him to go for the finish, it does take away from the fight. Then we go to the GOAT, Michael Johnson, knocking out Ottman Azaitar in the second round. Islam's reign might come to an end when he fights the GOAT. Michael Johnson in 1. The hand speed on this guy, man, still too. They say speed is one of the first things to go from a fighter. Not Michael Johnson. The man was fighting at like 2x speed compared to Ottman Azaitar. Ottman was moving forward, trying to land his clubbing shots, but very slow, and Johnson was just whipping those right hooks, landing 2 of them. The first one seemed to have stunned Ottman, and then the second one just KOs him. The follow-up shots were not even necessary, or maybe super necessary. And it wasn't just those punches either. Even in the earlier parts of the fight, Michael Johnson was hurting Ottman with a few other shots too. His jab and straight were stunning him. Just too fast, man. Way better of a boxer. Crazy to think at 38 years old, Michael Johnson is still getting big wins like this, and he's on a win streak. 2-fight win streak. And he called out Bobby Green, which is an excellent fight, and it's crazy they never fought each other. These guys have been in the UFC since like the early 2010s, in the same weight class, and they never fought each other. That's the fight you do. Michael Johnson versus Bobby Green. Or, the GOAT versus the King. Is his name really still King? And then we go to Yoel Alvarez, destroying Drakkar Klose, like absolutely annihilating him. The way that he finished him was so savage that looked like he was about to be a Mortal Kombat fatality. So he threw the jab in straight. Both punches missed as Drakkar Klose is moving back. But then Alvarez switched stances forward, landing the left straight at the same time, building up momentum for the punch, and then leg kicks him to offset Drakkar's stance, crashing him into the fence, flying kneeing him, which rocked Drakkar Klose, put him into a one-armed guillotine, and hammering him across the head with his other hand, stopping him from falling to the ground. Great job by Dan Miragliotta for recognizing the knockout, because if that was Keith Peterson, bro would have thought that Drakkar Klose was fighting out of the guillotine or something. So Alvarez had an amazing performance. Great knockout. But if there is one criticism we can point out in this fight, it was how easy Drakkar Klose took him to the ground. That's like one of Alvarez's biggest weaknesses in his game is his takedown defense. He has a below average takedown defense, even statistically. It's at 42%. And Drakkar Klose is not like a great wrestler or anything like that. He threw an uppercut to try to intercept him, but Drakkar was able to get the takedown, lift him, slam him. Alvarez was able to get back up to his feet, which is really good, but that's always been like one of the biggest weaknesses of his game. He showed good takedown defense against Elvis Brenner in his last fight. Before this one, he defended every single takedown, but nearly every opponent of his in the UFC has taken him down. It's a great performance by Alvarez. We do want to see when he goes up against the better fighters of the lightweight division to really develop the takedown defense, because once he does, he's going to be a huge problem for these other lightweights. And then we go to the Slenderman fight. Sean Woodson knocking out Fernando Padilla in the first round. So usually Woodson doesn't get these big knockouts like that. He's been going to a decision a lot more often lately, but he was so accurate in this fight. Most of the shots he was throwing were landing shots in close, landing shots in close range, long range, showing good striking defense. Fernando was very aggressive in this fight, but then the left hook, uppercut, left hook combo lands, rocking Fernando. And then from the southpaw stance, Woodson ends the fight with a lunging right hook, left hook combo, knocking his opponent out. So it was like ding, bong, bong, KO. Huge win for Sean Woodson, man. Fernando didn't have great striking defense in this fight. Then we go to Felipe Lima defeating Miles Johns by unanimous decision. Lima showed his technical prowess, well-roundedness, beating up Johns with a jab, backstepping into takedowns, jumping on the back in the third round, and almost getting the rear naked choke. Multiple different grips, which Miles Johns was able to fight out of, and also get out of the back take. He dropped Lima, or Technically, I don't know if it'll be counted as a knockdown, but he landed the right overhand. Lima touched the ground with both hands, and in the sport of boxing, that would be counted as a knockdown. Boxing, that would be counted as a knockdown, but I don't know if it is in MMA. Well, he hurt Lima briefly with the overhand in the second round and was just throwing huge haymakers and overhands for most of that fight, try to draw Lima into a firefight with him, but Lima stayed composed. It's great to see a prospect like Lima not get drawn into a war with Miles Johns, because John's been around for a long time, right? He's been fighting in the UFC for years, and this is only Lima's second UFC fight, which is crazy because his debut was against Muhammad Naimov in the lightweight division, and his second fight against Miles Johns. Those are not easy fights to begin your UFC career in, but he looked amazing in both. Even at one point in the second round, he threw double elbows as Johns was dipping down, halfway flying knee into a roundhouse kick. Some flashy, but mostly efficient techniques from Felipe Lima. He was trying to land that spinning back fist for the first and second rounds, but wasn't able to get it clean. He's an exciting fighter who will throw out crazy techniques like that, but he's very well rounded with even the basics of both striking and grappling. He is going to be a problem for the featherweight division, and we need guys like him, right? We need guys like Felipe Lima and John Silva, Diego Lopez. The new generation might start with these guys and not Ilya if he moves up to lightweight. Now he's saying a couple different things. He's saying that's what he wants, but he doesn't know if that's exactly what's going to happen. They're going to allow him to just go up to lightweight, but it's his choice, right? He gets to move up and vacate the belt if he wants, but he says he doesn't want to vacate the belt. How do you not want to vacate the belt, but you want to not fight a featherweight anymore? Because that's what he said. That'll be his last featherweight fight, was against Max Holloway, but he still doesn't want to vacate the belt. Unless he's talking about like he'll come back down to featherweight, then that's his last featherweight fight for now, but I don't know. I hope Ilia Topuria sticks around and fights his generation of competition, which are guys like Lopez, Silva, Lima, etc. And then we got a Miranda Maverick defeating Jamie-Lynn Horth by a unanimous decision. It was a decent fight. In the first round, Maverick was getting in and out with blitzing combos because Horth is just a gargantuan of a flyweight. Really tall, very long, but Maverick was landing some of her shots with those blitz. Then she started to use her takedowns at the end of the first round and also in the second round. Horth was defending most of them and eventually reversed the position up against the fence using the underhook, offsetting Maverick's balance, allowing her to jump on the back and go for the rear naked choke, but she had mostly a face crank, which Maverick was able to get out of, and countering it with a single leg takedown. And once they go to the ground, Horth gave up her back, Maverick jumps onto it, but Horth was able to spin out, getting on top of Maverick again. Maverick mostly had the better striking of the two, because even at the end of the third round, she was landing better shots in the pocket, some blitzing shots from distance as well, winning the fight on the scorecards. Then Davy Grant defeating Ramon Tavares by a decision. This was an excellent performance from Davy Grant. He looked amazing in this fight, overwhelming Tavares with volume. In the beginning with a whole lot of kicks to the legs, to the body, try to set up head kicks off of that, a ton of oblique kicks, and then gradually throughout the fight, he was doing better in closer range. He started to go with those long strides inward in the opposite stance. So like if he's an orthodox, he would switch into southpaw, the opposite stance, and stride long into Ramon Tavares to land some of his hooks. This is kind of similar to how he knocked out Jonathan Martinez. But then in the third round, and like the later half of the second, I think, he would sit in the pocket in moments with Ramon Tavares and beating him there as well. So it was like a gradual closing in of distance that Davy Grant was being effective with. He started out very far and started to get closer and closer and winning every single range, building on what he started in the first round with the kicks, to the long punching combinations in the second round, to then the closer range combinations in the third round. Just showed to be the better fighter out of the two. And Dean Thomas was talking about how Ramon Tavares thinks he's doing better than he was, and that's why he wasn't letting his hands go. I don't agree with him on that. I thought Davy Grant was just the better fighter, and he was neutralizing Ramon Tavares with his output. He was landing 3 times as many strikes, and he was constantly throwing at all times. And in the third round, Davy Grant hurt Ramon Tavares with a right straight, and it didn't change the way Tavares was fighting. If he thought he was doing so well, and that's why he wasn't letting his hands go, if he thought that he wasn't getting hit clean by some of these big shots like Dean Thomas was saying, when he got hurt by the right straight, you would think then he would change it up, right? He would fight more aggressive and exchange with Davy Grant more, but he didn't. For like a minute and a half after getting hurt by the right straight, he was still fighting the same. It was until the end of the fight where he started to exchange with Grant more, and Grant was still winning. I don't think it was Ramon Tavares thinking that he was winning the fight. fight. I think Davy Grant was just neutralizing his game and was also just the better fighter out of the two. And we gotta talk about the knockdown, because in MMA, I don't know what is defined as a knockdown. In boxing, it's clear. If you touch the ground with your hands, with anything but your feet, it's a knockdown. In MMA, you could throw a kick, the other fighter can grab it, and they'll punch you and knock you off balance, and that will be scored as a knockdown. Sometimes you don't have to rock your opponent with the punch, but if you just hit them and they fall on their back, even though they're only balancing on one leg, that's still going to be a knockdown. I don't know if that's how they count it, but Ramon Tavares did grab one of the kicks and he did punch Davy Grant, making him fall on his back, and they're all saying that's a knockdown and all that stuff. I don't know. I have no idea how MMA defines knockdowns. The Unified Rules doesn't define them, because it didn't look like Davy Grant was hurt from that punch. It looked like he just was balancing on one leg and got punched and he had to fall to the ground because there's no way he's gonna balance himself. So excellent performance from Davy Grant. And then Piera Rodriguez defeats Josephine Knudsen, not Knudsen, by a decision. Big upset win. She brawled with her in the beginning. Ran right at her, throwing hands, throwing kicks, and getting easy takedowns. It seemed like she got nearly every takedown in the fight. Knudsen was trying to go for a triangle and rubber guard and stuff like that, but the pressure from Rodriguez ultimately won her the fight. It wasn't a crazy technical fight, but it just showed what a mixed martial artist who is well-rounded enough can do against a kickboxer who mostly tries to just stand up with her opponents. You have to be well-rounded in this game. It gives you such an advantage. Even if you're technically, like in certain areas, not as good as the other fighter. So good win by Rodriguez, man. And I hope you guys enjoyed the card. What was your guys' favorite fights, favorite finishes, best performance of the card? And I'll see you guys in the next video.